My name is Reese, and I'm 72 years old, living a quiet life in a small house filled with more memories than furniture. Most days, I sit on my porch swing, watching the world go by, and it looks calm, peaceful, even happy. But the truth is, my life has been anything but. For decades, I carried a secret, a heavy burden handed to me with a smile and a stern warning. Don't talk about this outside. So, I learned to suffer with a smile, to nod and agree, to pretend everything was fine when my world was crumbling around me. The breaking point wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, suffocating realization that I was disappearing, consumed by the silence I'd promised to keep. It was a Tuesday, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, when I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were hollow, her smile a fixed, unfeeling mask. That was the day I decided the secret would no longer define me. This isn't just my story. It's a testament to the quiet battles fought behind closed doors and the power it takes to finally open them. Have you ever felt trapped by unspoken words? Ever felt like you were living a lie to protect someone else's fragile peace? Then stick around, because you might just find a piece of yourself in my journey. I was a child of unspoken rules. Our house wasn't loud with arguments, but rather hushed with an unspoken understanding. Some things just weren't discussed. My parents, bless their hearts, were masters of avoidance. They believed that if you didn't acknowledge a problem, it ceased to exist. For my older brother, Michael, this meant his struggles with alcohol were swept under the rug. He was going through a phase, or just having a bit of fun. I was 15, bright-eyed and eager to please, when I first heard the phrase that would haunt me for decades. Michael had come home late, stumbling, his eyes glazed over, and he'd broken a vase, a family heirloom my mother cherished. My father, instead of anger, had a quiet, almost desperate plea in his voice as he looked at me, a silent witness to the chaos. "Reese," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder, his grip surprisingly firm, "don't talk about this outside." My mother, her face pale, had simply nodded in agreement, her eyes begging me to understand. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but a deep-seated fear, a desperate attempt to maintain appearances, to preserve the family's image. And so, the first brick in my wall of silence was laid, not with force, but with a plea, a seemingly harmless request that would shape the rest of my life. I learned quickly that a cheerful demeanor was my shield, a way to deflect questions, to avoid the uncomfortable truths festering beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect family. The weight of that unspoken agreement settled upon my shoulders, a heavy cloak I wore everywhere. It started small, a casual omission here, a carefully worded evasion there. Soon, the act became second nature, a silent dance I performed for anyone who dared to look too closely. As I grew older, the "don't talk about this outside" mantra expanded beyond Michael's drinking. It encompassed my mother's quiet depressions, which she masked with tireless housework and an almost manic cheerfulness. It included my father's increasingly distant demeanor, his long hours at work becoming less about providing and more about escaping. We were a family unit, but we were each orbiting our own separate planets, held together by the gravity of our shared secret. I excelled in school, poured myself into extracurriculars, anything to maintain the illusion of normalcy, to give my parents a reason to smile, a success story to present to the world. I became the perfect daughter, the overachiever, the one who never caused trouble. Inside, though, a constant knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. Every casual conversation felt like a minefield. Would I accidentally reveal too much? Would someone see through my carefully constructed facade? I remember a specific incident, a summer afternoon when I was about 22. Michael had been particularly bad that week, and my mother was confined to her bed, resting. A neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a sweet, well-meaning woman, stopped by with a casserole. She asked, with genuine concern, "How's your mother feeling, dear? Haven't seen her out much lately." My heart pounded. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. My mind raced, trying to formulate a plausible lie. "Oh, she's just a bit under the weather, Mrs. Henderson," I chirped, forcing a bright smile. "A touch of the flu going around, you know." Mrs. Henderson nodded sympathetically, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me, quickly followed by a crushing sense of shame. Each lie chipped away at my soul, making me feel less and less like Reese, and more like an elaborate performance. The smile became my default setting, a reflex, even when my heart was breaking. I learned to laugh at inappropriate times, to deflect with humor, to change the subject with a practiced ease that would have made a politician proud. It was exhausting, this constant vigilance, this relentless effort to present a perfect picture when the reality was anything but. The silence wasn't just about protecting my family's reputation. It was about protecting their fragile emotional landscape, and in doing so, I sacrificed my own. My life became a meticulously choreographed ballet, each step designed to avoid a misstep, each smile a carefully placed mask. The silence deepened around me, a thick, suffocating blanket woven from unspoken words and unacknowledged pain. The years passed, and the silence only grew heavier. Michael's struggles continued, ebbing and flowing, sometimes quiet, sometimes roaring, but always present. My parents, trapped in their own cycle of denial, became more withdrawn, their lives shrinking to the confines of our house. I tried to help subtly at first, leaving articles about addiction where Michael might find them, suggesting family counseling, but my efforts were met with firm resistance, a polite but undeniable wall. "We're fine, Reese," my mother would say, her eyes darting away. "We don't need to air our dirty laundry." My father would simply grunt, his focus seemingly on the newspaper in his hands. I started to feel isolated, like an observer in my own life. My friends, though loving and supportive, couldn't truly understand. How could they? I never told them the truth. When they talked about their family dramas, their fights, their reconciliations, I would offer platitudes, a knowing nod, a sympathetic smile, all while a part of me screamed in frustration. The worst part was the way it affected my relationships. I found it impossible to truly open up to anyone, to let them see the cracks in my veneer. Every potential partner was met with a carefully curated version of Reese, one who came from a happy, stable home. The fear of judgment, the fear that someone would see the real me and recoil, was paralyzing. I remember meeting David, a kind, gentle man I truly cared for. We dated for a year, and he talked about his own family, their quirks, their disagreements, their messy, beautiful reality. I envied him, that openness, that freedom to simply be. One evening, as we sat on his porch swing, the stars bright above us, he asked me about my childhood. "You always seem so put together, Reese," he said, a thoughtful look on his face. "Like nothing ever rattled you. What was it like growing up?" My heart pounded. This was my chance, perhaps, to finally unburden myself. The words were on the tip of my tongue, the truth aching to be set free. But then an image flashed in my mind, my father's worried eyes, my mother's desperate plea. "Don't talk about this outside." The fear ingrained so deeply took over. I laughed, a light, dismissive sound. "Oh, you know," I said, waving my hand airily. "The usual. A bit boring, actually. Nothing dramatic." David looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, and then he simply nodded. We drifted apart soon after that, and a part of me knew why. I couldn't connect on a deeper level because I couldn't be truly vulnerable. The weight of those unspoken words wasn't just a burden. It was a barrier, keeping me from genuine connection, from a life that felt authentic and truly mine. The silence, once a shield, had become a cage, trapping me within its invisible bars. Each passing year, the walls grew thicker, the escape routes fewer. I was suffocating slowly but surely, in the very secret I'd promised to keep. The quiet suffering continued for decades, a constant hum beneath the surface of my life. My parents passed away, leaving me and Michael to navigate our fractured relationship on our own. His addiction remained, a ghostly presence, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, but always there. I kept up the facade, even for him, never directly addressing his problem, always offering gentle suggestions, veiled concerns. I was still operating under the ingrained directive: don't talk about this outside. And, by extension, don't talk about it inside either, not truly. The breaking point didn't come with a bang, but with a whisper, a tiny crack in the dam of my carefully constructed silence. It was my 70th birthday. Michael, surprisingly, was sober. He came over, brought a small cake, and we sat in my living room, the same living room where so many silences had been kept. We talked about inconsequential things, the weather, a new show on TV, old family photos. And then he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in what felt like forever. His eyes, usually clouded or distant, were clear. "Reese," he said, his voice a little hoarse. I know it wasn't easy. Growing up. With me." My heart stopped. He had never, ever acknowledged it. Never. I felt a surge of emotions, relief, sadness, a flicker of anger at all the years lost to this silent understanding. But before I could respond, before I could finally say all the things I'd kept bottled up, he looked away, a familiar defensiveness creeping back into his eyes. "But we got through it, right?" he added quickly, almost to himself, and then he forced a small, uncomfortable laugh. "Just like Mom and Dad always said, some things are just private." And just like that, the crack sealed itself. The weight descended once more, heavier than ever. In that moment, I realized that the silence wasn't just about protecting them. It was about protecting me from the discomfort of confrontation, from the vulnerability of truth. It was a habit, a reflex, a prison I had built for myself, brick by silent brick. I looked at Michael, this man who was my brother, yet a stranger in so many ways, and I saw a reflection of myself. Two people bound by a shared past, but separated by a wall of unspoken words. The pain wasn't just his or my parents', it was mine, and it was crushing me. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I cried for the first time in years. Not silent tears, but wrenching sobs that shook my entire body. It was a release, a rebellion, a declaration that the secret would no longer hold me captive. The smile, that constant, reassuring smile, felt like a betrayal, a lie I no longer wanted to live. The tears flowed, washing away years of carefully contained emotion, leaving behind a raw, aching space that was both terrifying and liberating. The illusion was shattered, and in its place, a fragile hope began to stir, a quiet yearning for true freedom. The days after my birthday cry were a blur of intense introspection. I started small. I started with a journal, a physical space where I could finally pour out all the thoughts and feelings I'd suppressed for so long. The pages filled quickly, a torrent of raw emotion, of anger, of sadness, of regret. It was messy, disjointed, but it was real. I wrote about Michael, about my parents, about the burden of don't talk about this outside. I wrote about the smile, and how it had become a cage. Then I started talking to myself, out loud, in the privacy of my own home. I would stand in front of the mirror and say, "My brother is an alcoholic." Or, "My parents were afraid to face their problems." The words felt foreign at first, clumsy on my tongue, but with each repetition they gained power, becoming less like a confession and more like a statement of fact. It was a way of reclaiming my own narrative, of dismantling the ingrained silence piece by piece. One afternoon, I was at the grocery store, and I ran into Mrs. Henderson's daughter, Mary, a woman about my age. We chatted idly, and then Mary mentioned Michael. "I heard he's been having a tough time," she said, her voice gentle, without judgment. For a split second, the old reflex kicked in, the urge to deflect, to smile and say, "Oh, he's fine." But then a new voice, a stronger voice, spoke up inside me. It was my own. "He has," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "He's been struggling with addiction for a long time." Mary's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, but then she just nodded, her expression softening. "I'm so sorry, Reese," she said genuinely. "That must be incredibly hard for you." And in that moment, something shifted. The earth didn't open up and swallow me. Mrs. Henderson's ghost didn't appear to scold me. Instead, I felt a lightness, a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in decades. It was a small step, a single brick removed from the wall, but it felt monumental. It was a glimmer of hope, a whisper that perhaps, just perhaps, I could finally break free. Each truth spoken, no matter how small, felt like a breath of fresh air after years of holding my breath. The silence began to recede, replaced by a quiet strength, a growing conviction that my voice, once stifled, deserved to be heard. Breaking a lifelong habit of silence isn't easy. There were days when the old fears would creep back in, when I'd catch myself about to deflect, to offer a polite evasion. But with each small act of honesty, I gained confidence. I joined a support group for families of addicts, something I would never have dared to do before. Sitting in that circle of strangers, listening to their stories and then hesitantly sharing my own, was incredibly cathartic. For the first time, I felt truly seen, truly understood, without judgment. They knew the unspoken rules, the hidden shame, the constant struggle to maintain appearances. They knew about the smile. The biggest challenge, though, was Michael. It was a long, slow process. I started by setting boundaries, something I had never done. I told him I wouldn't enable his addiction, but I would support his recovery. It was met with anger, with accusations, with the familiar defensiveness. But I held firm, my newfound strength surprising even myself. I told him calmly, clearly, how his addiction had affected me, how the silence had hurt me. It was raw, uncomfortable, and often painful. There were tears from both of us. There were arguments, heated words exchanged after years of polite avoidance. But through it all, something new began to emerge, a genuine, albeit fragile, conversation. It wasn't a sudden fix, not a Hollywood ending. Michael still struggles, but he's in recovery and we talk. We actually talk. About our past, about the "don't talk about this outside" rule that shaped our lives. He even admitted, one quiet afternoon, that he wished things had been different, that he wished we had talked about it sooner. It's not perfect, but it's real. And for the first time in my life, I feel real too. The smile is still there sometimes, but now it's genuine, born not of obligation or fear, but of true happiness, of connection, of finally finding my voice after decades of silence. I still sit on my porch swing, but now, when I look out at the world, I don't just see what's outside. I see what's within, and it's finally wonderfully free. The path to healing was winding and often uncertain, but with each step, the air around me grew lighter. The weight that had burdened me for so long began to lift, replaced by a sense of liberation I never thought I'd experience. Today, at 72, my life is far from perfect, but it is authentically mine. Michael is still on his journey to sobriety, and while there are good days and bad days, we now face them with open communication, not silence. The echoes of "don't talk about this outside" still linger occasionally, a faint whisper of a long-lost habit, but they no longer dictate my actions. I speak my truth, gently but firmly, and I encourage others to do the same. The key lesson I learned, one that took a lifetime to truly grasp, is that suffering with a smile is no way to live. True strength isn't about enduring in silence. It's about finding your voice, even when it's trembling, and speaking your truth. It's about recognizing that protecting others' comfort at the expense of your own well-being is a form of self-betrayal. Your story, your experiences, your pain, they are valid, and they deserve to be acknowledged, processed, and ultimately shared, if that is what you choose. If you, like me, have carried a secret, a heavy burden of unspoken words, I urge you to consider this. What would happen if you dared to speak? What liberation might you find on the other side of that long-held silence? It won't be easy, but the freedom that awaits you is worth every ounce of courage it takes. The woman who looked in the mirror that ordinary Tuesday and didn't recognize herself is gone. In her place is Reese, the woman who finally learned to truly smile, not to hide but to shine.